Since 1999, when I went to my first conference, I've never been to a conference where every talk was interesting. I haven't been able to doze off for a second even.
When someone comes to me and says, well, the science says, wait a minute, the science doesn't say anything. Science is about a debate, it's about confronting what Ioannidis and Tom Jefferson were talking about. It's about confronting different ideas, it's about sharing data.
Professor Schippers, may I ask you some questions?
Yes, of course. What do you want to know, Rico?
So here we are again.
Yes.
Nearing the end of this conference about the lack of scientific freedom. This is one of the venues. Let's start there. So what do you see here, Michaéla?
Well, I thought I was in the wrong place because it looked so shabby, but then it turned out it was the right place. So I asked people, is this the right place? Are you sure? Okay, yeah. Inside it looks nice.
I'm pretty sure the organizers could have found a nice hall inside the university. Instead of that, they decided to go for their cultuurhuset in good Danish.
Yes.
At a skateboard venue thingy with spray paint on the walls. Leading into a question. So, if we need to start anew, is that the thing that the thing that I take away from these 2 days is we need to start anew a lot of things, and if we are to start anew, we need to do that outside of the old organizations, and that's why we're here.
I think it's a very important question. Do you start outside or inside the existing structure? And I think this question is, a lot of people are implicitly talking about this. Should we change the structure from inside out or the whole mechanisms, or should we start anew and put it next to the existing structures?
Yes, I think your statement that we should get the journals to go hope that they get back to on track is utterly unrealistic. Journals, biomedical journals, were a problem before the pandemic. They were publishing commercial, with a big C and with a small c, studies before the pandemic. After the pandemic and during the pandemic, well, we all know what went on. If I can just give you an example, before the pandemic, Lancet, that very famous scientific journal, published a network meta-analysis of antidepressants, all antidepressants. They used published papers, including Keller, including some of the papers that were known to be fraud, and in your country were actually exposed as fraudulent papers and fraudulent data in the courts. And yet, Horton and any of the other editors do not take responsibility for the stuff that they publish. So I think that biomedical journals are part of the problem, they're not part of the solution. And we need to find a different way of communicating which doesn't have anything to do with biomedical journals. Just ignore them. They can go on publishing commercial trials and go on publishing all this stuff that they publish lately. Thank you.
That's a very small statement, and I fully agree that journals have multiple problems. We just had our meeting on peer review and scientific publication in Chicago, and we went through all of these problems. Sometimes it sounds very desperate, but at the same time, they are the battleground where many of these battles are fought. So, just abandoning that battleground entirely is not something that I believe is the right thing to do. I agree that my perspective that we can have perfect journals would be utopian, and I'm not arguing that we can have perfect journals. Science is never perfect.
If you look at it, at this conference, what I take away is there's lack of scientific freedom, but at the same time, the deadly consequences are also being presented here of that lack of scientific freedom. It costs millions and millions of lives. That is very clear. So why can't we have transparency? Why is it so important to hide things? There are a lot of monetary involvements and monetary gains, of course, but isn't it important to make sure that, people get healthy? And so we should start to focus on the right outcomes, not on the outcomes of the pharmaceutical industry, maybe.
Of the science. The most likely outcome is probably the right one, so let's focus on that one. That's the statement that was made today, and not the outcome that some vested interests might be pursuing. So a new term I learned here today was, or yesterday rather, institutionalized science. Now, institutionalization, I would associate that with inmates, people in prison. If you're in prison long enough, you'll be afraid to leave those prison walls and make it back to society. So institutionalization is a wrong thing. Same with people in hospitals. It's a bad thing. How can it be good for science and for other institutions like health authorities that were mentioned just now in the presentation, or even journalism? Is science institutionalized, Michaéla? How would you reflect on that?
Yes, definitely, for a big part. So there is a difference between what we say we do and what we actually do. So we say we are doing open science, it's important to do that and to be as transparent as possible. And what actually happens is there are money streams coming in, and a lot of scientists then, let's say, do the things that, they're feeded by something. And so not all of them, of course. But the thing is, every time something institutionalizes, I also trace that back for Christianity, for instance. Christianity started with Jesus, who made people well, and then...
Just on the skateboard court? Yeah, exactly.
And then they hanged him on a cross. So this is the most famous martyr in the world. But then Christianity started. It started maybe in a good way, but then it got institutionalized. The churches, and they, in the Catholic Church, they got money from people to absolve their sins. So that's a nice income model. For instance, I'm just stating just one example.
If we go on that metaphor, that didn't go away. So so I'm not a religious person, but that has replaced religion the way it started, maybe.
In a way, but there are still people who do it in the right way. So let's make sure these seeds get a little bit of water, and the right seed, we are going to feed the right seeds, and not the ones that take all the water and take up all the space and take up everything in the world. Because now what we've given as a society, we've given so much room to these things. Like I said in the presentation, there's a highway for scientists that follow the narrative, and there is a back way or no way at all for scientists who try to do good research, and it's not narrative.
Okay, so some of them may have assembled here. I'm no scientist, but what I observed, people here were craftsmen. They were seasoned top scientists, and they have a shared sentiment like censorship is all around. And there was a presentation yesterday about obviously fraudulent papers that cannot be factual or truthful, didn't get retracted at all. Retracting papers that are obviously fraudulent is all but impossible. There was a presentation yesterday.
Yes.
How do we move out of that then?
That is a good question, and that was a question that even John Ioannidis tried to answer, but it's impossible to answer because things have to change at so many levels. But the main thing is we need to have different outcome drivers. The outcome driver shouldn't be the reputation of the university, shouldn't be the money that's flowing in. It should be the outcome of good, the craftsman, as you say, scientific. So we need a culture change, a complete culture change of how this is coming about and how we are going to do it and how we want it as a public. Because this is funded by public money, so the public should have a say in it. And they should make sure they find their voice as well. Because the public thinks, science is too complicated. Yeah, even scientists find it too complicated situation now. But it isn't complicated. We should do good science, period.
One member of that audience, a lady called Kim Witzak, said sometimes the greatest purpose in life chooses you. So that would be your thing, purpose in life, ikigai. What did you take away from her presentation just now? Yeah,
that was a really interesting presentation about her husband dying from medicine, and there was no There's no other explanation possible, almost.
I
And
have to elaborate on that. So her husband committed suicide after having been on psychopharmacal drugs for 5 weeks.
yes, and that had a known side effect: suicidal thoughts and suicidal actions. The thing is, I thought there was a new psychological term there: transcendental post-traumatic growth. So transcendental means a greater purpose than just for yourself. So she wants to change society. She wants to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone again. And knowing that pharmaceuticals are the third leading cause of death in the world, she has taken on a huge task. But she gets really her life purpose out of that. And I was thinking about you as well, to be honest, because you said I don't have this really clear life purpose, but apparently sometimes the purpose finds you.
Like making this report from this setting. Well, true. Okay. What other things did you are you taking home with you from these past 2 days? What solutions do you derive from these past 2 days?
The most foremost solution is, or a thing is, we have to make changes. And it has to be done from all levels, but we can't expect people, or we can't expect scientists, or we can't expect, the government or anyone to do it. We have to do it ourselves. We have to make sure our voice gets heard. The public knows about other narratives, but not even narratives, but science. They need to be informed about all this. So I would wish that many people would see this and draw their own conclusions, because transparency is the main thing, I think, that we need in this world. We shouldn't cover up, like, for 75 years the effects of whatever trials are around. If they're good effects or if they're bad effects, they shouldn't be hidden. They should be made known to the public. Maybe with a good explanation next to it, but transparency.
Okay. So as a final remark, I would like to thank the organization for allowing me to film this. We will create a subset of that with some quotes to illustrate what we've been discussing amongst ourselves. And we urge everybody to go watch the integral presentations of the courageous people here standing out for their trade, right?
I definitely want to recommend that, because since 1999, when I went to my first conference, I've never been to a conference where every talk was interesting. I haven't been able to doze off for a second even, because every sentence that was said was interesting. So I definitely urge you to see all of them integral.
Excellent. Now let's see if we can talk to some of the other scientists then.
Okay.
It's with pleasure I introduce our first speaker today, Peter Gøtzsche. He's going to be talking about the Chinese-US joint cover-up of the origins of COVID-19. Thank you.
Now, this talk in some way summarizes the whole meeting, which you will hear now. Lancet's editor, Richard Horton, had clear conflicts of interest in relation to China, which I have detailed in my book. The petition aimed for 25,000 signatures and people could write comments. I looked up the website, of course, and two were highlighted at the top. Now it gets funny. It must have been a robot that selected the two most recent comments. I entered the website at the worst possible moment. 20,000 have signed. Kimberly Rambeau signed 20 hours ago. Fuck you, Daszak, signed 1 week ago. I browsed a few comments more, enlightened by the fuck Daszak comment, and one was amusing. I'm signing because I want to stop fake propaganda. Well, see how easy it is to fool people by referring to authority. The Lancet letter was fake propaganda of the worst sort I have ever seen. When I checked again a month later, there were 2 fewer signatories than before, so it seems some censorship had occurred.
The fuck you Daszak.
The fuck you Daszak message was gone. Instead, the 2 first messages praised Heine highly, but they were 2 years old. So it seems that no one had wanted to praise China more recently. I didn't get the last
So the
line.
idea is, because they knew, or because they were supposing that it had actually escaped from a lab,
Yeah,
that's the reason why they wanted to cover this up.
yeah, of
And
course.
that's why they made this whole
Of course.
hysteria about it.
Of course, it's absolutely evident that this is a huge embarrassment for both USA and China. And therefore they covered it up so effectively. I've never seen anything so deplorable in my whole life than this.
Yeah, adding to this, I think there's two things. So there's the lab leak theory, and you give good credit of that. At least what they're saying is not correct. And there is the deadliness of the virus. There's two different things. And if you look at the work of John Ioannidis, I think he published now his third paper about the low case fatality rate. So these are two different things. But
Yeah.
the third thing is actually the damage that's been done outside of the virus, like the measures that were in effect. So
The what?
the measures, so the non-pharmaceutical interventions.
Yeah.
That has killed way more people. Like even the hunger has doubled. 950 million people are now going hungry each day. And so
Yeah.
these are one of them. Mental health, economic effects.
Yeah.
Like these are huge.
I would love to comment on some of what you said there. My research early on agreed with the research of John Ioannidis. And I was into this before the COVID-19 pandemic. I knew a good deal about viruses. I have worked in the Department of Infectious and Tropical Diseases in Copenhagen 3 times. And I knew, for example, that when there was an outbreak of measles in the Faroe Islands, maybe almost 200 years ago, measles hit a non-immune population. They had not had measles for a lifetime. And this meant that the mortality rate from measles was about 10 times higher than in normal populations where measles come and go. And this tells you that if a virus hits a non-immune population, it can be very deadly. So this was exactly what happened with COVID-19, that it hit a non-immune population, which is a major reason why so many people died. So I tend to agree with Manfred that, and I have published about this, that I have not regarded COVID-19 as more dangerous than many of the other viruses we are used to. But since it hit a non-immune population, it became a disaster. This is very important to know.
And our next speaker is waiting. So I have the great pleasure of introducing John Ioannidis. He's one of the most cited researchers in the world, and he will be talking to us today about what happens when a scientist gets results about COVID-19 that are unwelcome. So please enjoy.
Good morning.
Morning.
Can you see my slides?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you again for the great to join this session and to share some thoughts with you. And apologies that I'm not there in person. I will be there in person in the afternoon. There was a mix-up with my flights. So what happens when a scientist gets into that unfortunate situation to have some results, COVID-19, or other that don't agree with some narrative? So you will be attacked. And my experience in being attacked during the pandemic, I think, is just one among many. This is a Nature survey that I was one of the participants. They asked 321 people who have been active on COVID-19, on commenting and appearing and publishing, and 70% of them had some nasty experience. About 60% had attacks on their credibility, about 40% had emotional, psychological distress, 30% had reputational damage, 20+% had threats of physical or sexual violence, 15% had death threats, a couple percent had physical attacks, and others got other types of attacks. Other than physical attacks, I got all of them, and in a big dose, I have to say. But who knows, maybe others got even more than that, and I feel sorry even more for people who had opposite narratives or opposite data compared to mine and got attacked. I feel tremendously sad that people who had opposite opinions that could really trash my work were attacked. I don't care that much about myself as I care about them, because I think that silencing and putting people in difficult position is the worst that you can have for science.
Within this, the crisis within science really became visible. Like there was like a really highway for kind of junk science that was supporting the narrative, also maybe good science, but at least that was got a highway, and we got like the back path, or I don't know. It was really hard to get things published. I'm wondering what can we do about this? Should we start our own journal, like the Freedom of Science journal? How can we address this crisis in science? What do you think? This is a big question.
So I think that you raise a very important point, and I think that I heard from many people that they had a lot of difficulty to publish their work. Especially if the journals that they send the papers, had already put their name along with a given narrative. For example, the paper that we published in the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology that clearly showed that the Imperial College Nature paper with the 3 million averted deaths was just a blatant example of selective reporting. Selecting a model that had very bad fit to the data, even though the same team had a much better model available at the same time that showed no deaths averted from lockdown versus more, manageable interventions. Not saying no intervention, but just for example, avoiding big events rather than just shutting down schools and everything. So, in my perspective, Nature should have retracted the Imperial College paper. It was so obvious. It's never been so obvious to me in my life. Such a classic case of selective reporting, completely subverting the outcome that you're interested in. But nevertheless, they sent it out for review to the Imperial College team and to a reviewer who had published pretty much and made a career out of exactly the same conclusions with the same model, while he had no career before the pandemic. And so what do you do then? I think that you have to go to other journals. You have to go to more serious journals that respect themselves more, and hope that some journals that really behaved very badly during the pandemic, they find their way back to some more responsible behavior. I believe that we should all struggle towards just allowing that freedom of speech and freedom of debate and allowing different narratives to exist. I feel very sad. Peter showed these signature collections. I published an editorial in BMJ where I argued that we should not be collecting signatures, that this is not how science should happen. I saw messages being sent by deans or former deans or department chairs urging their faculty to sign documents about condemning other faculty or espousing a given approach to the pandemic. I don't agree with that. I cannot agree with that. How can you ask an assistant professor, if you're a full professor or a chair or dean, to sign a document? That person is just put on a corner and thinks, well, if I don't do that, then will I be promoted? Will I be able to stay in the university? So I think we need more peace, we need more tolerance, we need more acceptance, we need more willingness to say, goodness, I may be wrong, maybe the others are right. Let me give them an opportunity to express themselves better and more often. Unless we do that, I don't really see a solution, and I don't think that it's one university type of job. It's something that's pervasive across science and across society.
So, dear audience, once again, turn off your mobiles. Don't move around on your chairs. They make a lot of noise. They make a lot of noise. Don't go and take coffee or tea while the speaker is speaking. You will have a coffee break just afterwards.
Peter, I'm not going to give my presentation because I would make a lot of noise.
Oh, so the next speaker will make a lot of noise. He says, and I have known David for over 10 years, and I know that is the case, but the kind of noise David makes is very pleasant. He rocks the boat and ruffles the feathers, as they say in England. Now, David is now director of the Commons Network and previous member of Parliament in Brussels, elected for Spain, even though he originally come from California, which is why he speaks so good English. So
That's not true.
So, please, David, the floor is yours.
Okay. Your house is on fire. The firefighters arrive and they just cross their arms and stand outside your house while your house burns. And you see a person, go put out the fire, put out the fire, look at it, what are you just doing, just standing there? And he said, well, let's negotiate the conditions. How much? Let's negotiate the price. Let's have you sign a non-disclosure agreement. This is what happens. This is what happens when you're sick, when you have a problem, when there's a pandemic. That's what the pharmaceutical industry does to take advantage of what I call, it's very commonly known, it was made popular by Naomi Klein, the shock doctrine. The shock doctrine is when there's some kind of catastrophe or great danger or fear, they take advantage of people's emotional, physical state to change the rules, to change the conditions, and usually to benefit the rich, powerful elites, in this case, the pharmaceutical industry. And I spoke a few days ago with someone who's representing all of the public health governments, agencies of Europe, and he said, well, you know, pharma has been riding on the wave of the pandemic. What is the wave of the pandemic? It's the wave of deregulation, higher exclusivity, less transparency, more patent protection, etc., etc., etc. And they're riding on the wave of the pandemic, which is getting back to the firefighters. Let's negotiate while there's a pandemic going on, which gives them greater strength, to push their Christmas list, their wish list. What is the wish list of the pharmaceutical industry in Europe? You can imagine. And they're negotiating it right now in the European Parliament, in the Commission, and in the Council. The wish list is against the wish list of ordinary people for public health. Okay, so what is the solution? The solution is, can you on to my last thing that I said? Yeah, this is all about that. Yeah, this. Okay. The idea, one idea, obviously, and the best idea, we're not going to get it now, is that we think that the research pipeline, because most of all the basic research is done in public universities, public research centers, we pay for it, and they take advantage of it. The private companies privatize our knowledge that we pay for. So why don't we have the whole research pipeline be public and independent? When I say public, it's not enough for me. Public. It has to be also with participation, debate. I call it public citizen or public commons or public. It has to be public with a lot of safeguards as well, but public and independent. We're paying so much money. We're paying so much money. When you look at the cost of some cancer medicines, we're paying 10,000 euros a month for some cancer medicines that the production costs are $10 a month to make them. And that's what we're paying. So all of that public money is going there anyways. So why don't we take part of that money and set up a European R&D and pharmaceutical infrastructure over a number of years to develop our own medicines that would come out as generic priced medicines from the first day. There's no reason why this can't happen. There's only one reason: power. You could still be critical and be pessimistic and not trust lots of things, but I think to be able to live, you have to have some kind of hope. But you don't want to sell a type of science based on hope, which is what we have now. A type of hope is connection with other people and believing in these kind of values.
Thank you. I think
Here's another question.
It's actually over time now. We have a coffee break and then...
We have a few more minutes. Wait, one more. Give a question.
Just to remember, there was a question over there at the end.
Well, but come on, it's actually I who am the chair. Can you please, no. Can you please respect that just one time before we finish?
What's your question? What's your question?